What's up, everybody? Welcome back in. We love when jurors speak out to tell us what was important to them, what did they see in a case, and why did they come down with the verdict that they did. And we got that opportunity in the Robert Tellis case, a man who partially represented himself, then had attorneys, argued some on his behalf, took the stand in narrative form over multiple days, trying to convince the jury of his innocence. And then, even after he was convicted, he is giving interviews from the jail. So we're going to hear from Robert Tellis. What does he have to say about how he thinks the jury got it wrong? And then right after that, we get to hear exactly what the jury thought and what they went through from not one, but two jurors who spoke out independently. And we can compare what they said to each other and then, more importantly, to Robert Tellis. So hit that like button, make sure you subscribe, and let's take a look at these interviews together. So I love the saying, hindsight's 2020. But I love it even more when we get to watch and break down people speaking with 2020 clear vision. Now that they know what happened, what are they going to say? Is anything going to change? Especially now that we know this jury gave Tellis life, but with the possibility of parole after 20 years. So if he changes his tune, if he apologizes, if he said, I was just trying to get off, or I did this for my family, or whatever it may be, I got so mad because he ruined my life, whatever it may be, to start working towards some kind of rehabilitation so that in 20 years he can get out with still a little bit of life to live and, his family and his kids and all that. We're going to hear a lot about that in the interview, but will he start to turn the corner or will he double and triple down? We know he's going to appeal the case. Is he going to maintain his innocence? Which way is he going to go? Will it change eventually? Let's take a look at this interview, which somebody from Court TV went to the jail literally to interview him. We're going to hear the interview with Tellis, then a little bit from the interviewer of his perception of the situation.
I know that we have limited time, so I wanted to start with this. You were convicted of first-degree murder 2 days ago. Do you have a message for Jeff Garriman's family?
Yes, sir. And I am very sorry for their loss. It's tragic. He was clearly a good man who made a difference in the community and a difference in his family, but they certainly have my condolences, but I'm not guilty. I am innocent of his murder.
A jury of 12. You're a former attorney.
So we get our first answer, right? He ain't turning the corner. He's doubling down, which is no surprise, and that's absolutely his right, especially if he is innocent or believes he's innocent at this point still. Legally, he's guilty. Legally, we will call him guilty of that murder, said he did that. That's the jury's decision. That's how we're working in the legal world now. The appellate process will begin, but he is maintaining his innocence.
You helped select this jury. You say that they got it wrong?
I do. Yes, sir.
Why is that?
Obviously, there was a lot of evidence in, I think, every different direction. I think one of the important things that the jury did not focus on was the fact that, as was heard earlier during the trial, that at 8:50 a.m. I was at home texting with one of my kids. I did not leave home. And at 9:10, this SUV that looks very similar to my SUV pulls into my neighborhood while I'm still at home, then drives out 2 minutes later, follows the path to Mr. Gurman's home, murders Mr. Gurman, and makes its way back toward my home.
Well, let's talk about that.
So he says there's so much evidence that they just didn't see. That's how they got it wrong. And how he talks about that is he was texting with his child at 8 something in the morning, then 9:10 something that looks like his SUV drives through his house, then to Gurman's house to do the deed, then back. And from my perspective, that was the way he explained the story. He acts like that's the only way to view the evidence. I think that's not true. There's multiple interpretations potentially, and the jury ended up coming to a different conclusion. But this is good that we get to remember and hear all this before we hear from the jurors themselves.
Because prosecutors pointed to the text message that was on your wife's watch and not your cell phone. She was trying to get a hold of you. So where were you?
Again, as I testified, I had taken a walk, and when I came back home, I just walked in the door, I yelled up that I'm home, and that was it. I mentioned too that if I hadn't, then certainly she would have texted and called further. Right. So the fact.
So he doesn't say that that text was planted or it was edited or that text never happened. He doesn't say that because it was only on her Apple Watch. Remember, it was not on his phone or her phone printout, Cellbrite. And it was the "where are you" kind of text that he said wasn't there. She would have been saying all this stuff if I wasn't at the house. And then they're like, oh, but she did. On the Apple Watch, we saw it and took a picture of it. And so he says, oh, well, she would have kept texting me and kept calling me if I was not home.
The fact that there was just the one call and text within a couple minutes of each other shows that, again, there was no concern that I was not yet home or anything like that.
Why frame you? Because you believe that you're being framed, right? Being framed by who and why? Why not just kill you?
Right, and then again, that was something that I addressed on the stand as well. So I believe that Compass Realty, I want to do my investigation on this, but I was able to prove it. But I believe Compass Realty framed me to stop me from investigating them. And so when you think about this question about, well, why not kill you instead? Again, killing me wouldn't have stopped the investigations into them, and maybe even bolstered those investigations.
So they killed somebody else to stop the investigations against them because only Robert Tellis was the one that was able to do those investigations. But they didn't kill Robert Tellis because if he would have been gone, then somebody else would have definitely looked into it. So it sounds like he's saying nobody was looking into it or nobody could have done the job but him. But then if he wasn't there, somebody else definitely would have done the job. It's just not a good motive. It doesn't make any sense. From my perspective, and we talked about that while we listened to his testimony. We're going to hear if that motive made any sense to the jury or how they came to their decision. Did they even think about motive? Because, again, we know the state doesn't have to prove motive, but that was a big part of his case.
When people try to figure out why I was killed, or perhaps the investigation was picked up in my memory and worked on harder. But, again, like I said, because now that Mr. Foreman's been murdered, and I was framed for it, Compass Realty gets away with, not having to answer to any of the criminal conduct that they've engaged in. And also the real estate division complaint that I had filed against them, that got dropped after I got put in jail. It certainly is serendipity for them. If as a result of my supposedly killing Mr. Gurman, that they get to walk away without any repercussions for their criminal conduct.
I heard you take the stand, and I was there in court each and every day. You were there on the stand for a duration over 3 days, and you mentioned that on the.
I'll just give you a little look ahead. The jurors talk about him specifically being on the stand as well. So this part of the interview is important, again, with the context we're going to get in a little bit. And all this is happening just like right after the trial. I think it's within days of the trial, maybe 2 days.
The stand. Why did you want to take the stand? If you did it again, over again, would you? Because the jury didn't seem to believe what you had to say in your narrative.
Yeah, I would do it again. I don't know that it's necessarily my testimony had a negative impact. I think perhaps had we highlighted again a little harder the inconsistencies with the evidence, that perhaps they would have seen the truth. I don't know that my testimony had a negative impact. In fact, I think it, at the very least, the public got to hear my story. And each, while they're not jurors, they can decide whether or not this is all true. But
so, why did you take the stand? Do you think it hurt you? No, I don't think it hurt me. It sounded like he was going to say, if anything, I think it helped me. But he didn't say that necessarily. He said, I don't think it hurt me. And at least the public got to hear my story. And while they're not jurors, they at least can decipher maybe that it was true. Do you think that's what happened? Let me know in the chat if you think that's what happened. Wait, so what is his sentence? It's life, but with the possibility of parole. So he could technically get out after 20 years. There could be multiple parole meetings. I don't really know exactly how they do it in Nevada, but that's how most parole boards work. We don't have that in Florida. Peter, is this a smart move to give an unfettered interview within 2 days of being convicted? I would say absolutely not, Doc TJB, especially with an appeal pending. But even more so, it does nothing to help you. I don't see any benefit or any positive to him doing this interview. If you want to say he maintains his innocence, he can just say he maintains his innocence. But you've already told your story. You were on the stand for days. This looks like attention seeking to me. This looks like publicity seeking to me. He even mentions in there that maybe there is an aspect of that to this. So I would never advise my client to do something like this, even after they were convicted. I don't see the benefit personally, especially because you already got to tell your story and everybody was watching. Ginny, this type of unaliver is the most frightening to me. Believes himself to be so intelligent that he could convince the masses of nonsense. Well, just wait till what you hear about what the jury thinks about his intelligence level.
I'm innocent, and so I guess that's bottom line for me.
So who killed Jeff Gehrman then?
And like I said, I believe it is someone who was hired by Compass Realty.
And what steps are you going to do moving forward if you say that you're an innocent man behind bars, you're yet to be sentenced, you're yet to be moved to prison? What's next for you then?
So right now I'm working on my appeals. I do believe that I will get out early on appeal. So I'm working on that right now. As far as any investigations that I'd hope to...
I will get out early on appeal. That sounds like a sentence appeal, which is weird. I think maybe he means get out after he wins his appeal, but I just thought it was important because words are important, right? Definitions are important. So I just want to point that out.
To complete, unfortunately, I won't be able to do it from here. If there's enough time when I get out, such that all the evidence hasn't, basically aged. I guess I don't know if it's aged out, but if there's still yet evidence remaining by the time I get out, then great. Then I will continue to pursue those investigations when I get out.
When do you think that you're?
He's talking very confidently that he's delusional, or he's trying to continue to stay confident for his family or for the public. I don't know. But he's like, when I get out, I'm getting back into those investigations, et cetera, et cetera. Brianna said, Tellus should have just run for another office or went into private practice. I heard state lawyers can earn high compensation. Brianna, or just like anything besides what he did, right? But you are speaking as a rational person who, when life throws some hard things at you, or even you make some mistakes, which I think admittedly he'd say he makes some mistakes with the affairs and some of the actions in office, you got to get back up once you're knocked down and try to make the most of it. Do your best, rebuild, rehabilitate. Do not commit major crimes. Can the realty company sue him for slander if they want to waste a lot of time and money? I don't see what the point is of that. They're not going to collect anything from him, but theoretically they could if they can prove it's false.
Going to be getting out? When do you think you're going to be getting out? You've been convicted of first-degree murder. You're going to be sentenced, and the possibility is after serving 20 years parole, but you're unlikely to get parole unless you take responsibility for the actions that you've been convicted of.
So, in fact, it's going to be longer than 20 years. There are enhancements, so I'll be looking at probably 28 years. But again, it is my belief that, and I'm going to continue working on this, that I'll be able to get back to my family sooner through appeals. That's my main concern is getting back home to my family.
Let's talk about that, because in the mitigation, you had 3 witnesses that were on the stand in your defense. It was your wife, your ex-wife, and your mom. And you broke down in tears when your mom was on the stand, pleading.
Really interesting. His wife and his ex-wife came and testified on his behalf. And I think that probably made a difference. Maybe it'll make a difference in front of the parole board. Sometimes they're allowed to have family members there to speak on your behalf as well.
On your behalf for parole. And they were all characterizing you as a family man, but I hadn't seen your family in court supporting you during the trial.
I didn't want them there. And because of all the media, you got to understand that my family, they love me. I talk to them all the time. As you heard, I talked to
that a bunch of people had. Why wasn't his family there? Did they not support him? Does that look bad in front of a jury? He says he didn't want him there, and he kind of told them not to come. I don't remember if the jurors mentioned that in their interviews, so we'll keep an eye out for that. But interesting, move for him strategically and how that looks. I definitely don't think it helps, but he didn't want them there, not even his wife. Like, from my perspective, probably would still want my wife there. I know it would be excruciating, it would be horrible for her, but for her to be there with me, for us to go through this together, to show a united front and be a united front, that would be important. My kids, I wouldn't want to, if something like this, ever, God forbid, I was accused of doing or something and had to go to trial for this. I can't even imagine what that's like. But I can understand why not wanting your kids there, but it is an interesting thing, especially when they hear about them in the trial and the jury sees they're not here with you.
Kids all the time. I expressly did not want them during the proceedings. I didn't want them to suffer from all of this. That's been my main concern all along. So yeah, they didn't show up because I asked them not to. I wanted to protect them from this situation.
Why did you cry when your mom was testifying on your behalf? And, according to our viewers and people that have watched your trial, they didn't see much emotion from you whenever there were pictures of Mr. Gehrman or when his...
It's pretty hard-hitting questions. Like, you cried when your mom testified about you, but not when you saw somebody who was no longer alive and brutally murdered.
Family was on the stand. Why is that?
I don't know that, I certainly felt for them. I don't know if my face, demonstrated it or not, but I definitely felt for the family during their testimony. And I certainly, this has certainly been frustrating for you, but you got to understand that, I had to try to just prove my innocence to show the jury that, again, I am a family man. I am somebody who could not possibly have committed this murder. So that was my main goal during the trial, was to just to convey them and to show them the evidence, that I had seen that shows that this is, that I did not commit this murder. So, I'm sorry if it came off as though I didn't have emotion, but I thought I certainly conveyed it,
And on that same regard, viewers online, people love to weigh in on what they're watching at specific times, but a lot of people didn't believe that there was emotion on the stand when you appeared to be crying. Were you crying, and why?
And that wasn't for show. That just was not for show. This is not something that I planned. Basically, when I was talking about the fact that I was basically tortured, mentally, during this period where they detained me during the search, and I was already just about broken because they were talking about my family and what this was going to do to my family, and they'd already put me in this paper suit and this freezing environment. And by the time I walked into my house, it was a tornado. They trashed my children's rooms. They trashed my entire house, and my wife was sitting on the floor crying. And so I cried on the stand, and it wasn't for show. It wasn't me trying to gain any sympathy. I cried. And there were tears. My face was wet, but it wasn't for public consumption. It wasn't for the jury's sake. That's just something that came out. So if it looked unbelievable, then so be it, because it wasn't meant to be an act. It wasn't meant to be something to sway anybody.
And speaking of that jury, they were out for roughly 12 hours over 3 days, and they asked to see certain videos. One of the videos was what your defense team had pointed out, with what they say was hair on the driver of the suspect in a vehicle. And then the second was a comparison side by side of you walking with the AP article of you in your office from that Gehrman interview, and also video of the suspect. And a lot of people say that it's the same walk, that you have the same walk as the suspect. You say that it's not? Do you see the similarities?
I don't agree, but everyone's entitled to their opinion, but no, I don't agree.
All right.
Well, everyone's entitled to their opinion, but the jury's opinion matters most. And it seems like if they ask for those videos and then they end up coming back and convicting you, that they think it was the same. And so that creates a situation where now you're dealing with somebody's opinion literally being the most important opinion in your life, and they don't agree with you. He doesn't give us any reason as to why He doesn't think it's the same walk, but I think these are good questions that are kind of throwing him off balance. He doesn't have great answers to. He just says, I disagree, but they're entitled to their opinion. To me, that's kind of like filler fluff talk. It's like, I disagree, but of course everybody's entitled to their opinion. It's like, dude, their opinion is you killed a guy. That's their opinion. So if you think they're entitled to it, this is kind of a weird conversation that we're having, but I think it's a good interview. Personally, you guys let me know if you agree or disagree. What are his appellate issues? I mean, honestly, I think his counsel did a pretty good job for what they were dealing with. He had a lot to do with, the case and representing a narrative himself. Maybe there were some evidentiary issues where certain things came in or didn't come in. I think he's going to argue the judge didn't let him get into a lot of things when he was on the stand. The judge didn't force the state to give him a lot of things that would have proved this conspiracy, but I don't think any of those hold a lot of water personally. Tammy, so bizarre that he thought he could convince people that he is so important and powerful that cops, analysts, doctors, etc., would all risk their jobs to conspire to take him down for some realty company. It literally makes no sense when you connect the realty company to everybody in law enforcement, right? It's not like he's saying they were married to each other or somebody in law enforcement was married to the head realtor or whatever. He didn't really show any connection besides they were all out to get him, which again, in my perspective, made no sense.
Pieces of evidence.
I don't know. I was still hopeful, that they would see my innocence, but that was about it.
When the jury came back and we were all waiting, and then they asked you to stand at that defense table and they read the verdict, what went through your mind then?
Unfortunately, they got it wrong, and that it's time to continue on with my work and try to get home.
I know that you say that you believe that they got it wrong. Again, I want to circle back to how are you going to continue your investigation and to prove your innocence, since you really believe that, while behind bars, while in prison?
I think there are potentially a couple different ways, and we'll see whether or not they pan out. Currently, there's a lawsuit that between me and some of the folks in the office where I could potentially get some of the discovery that would connect some of the players, and then there's a lawsuit that I've filed against certain officers that may net some of the information that I need. But we'll see about that particular lawsuit. I know they're going to try to dismiss it now with a conviction. But that, again, could take years by the time we get to the point where I can get anything to demonstrate more of what is going on here.
You were convicted less than 48 hours ago. Why?
Even he doesn't really have a lot of good answers, just more discovery, things that he's going to get. If it was important to his case and the judge felt it was relevant, they would have let him get it without filing these civil lawsuits. You don't get more discovery in civil suits than you would get in criminal suits that would prove your innocence. So I'm not really sure where he's going with that, but it's pretty much what I expected him to say.
Is it important for you to speak out now?
I haven't seen this entire interview, by the way. I just saw clips before watching it fully here. I have watched the full juror interviews.
You have not been sentenced yet. And if you're going to be asking for an appeal, anything you say right now can be used against you. You know that.
Right. Well, and then again, obviously I'm here because, folks like yourself wanted to speak to me. And certainly, like I said, I'm innocent, and
turns it around on them. It's like, folks like yourself want to speak to me. It's like, yeah, of course, that's our job. We want to know the information, but why are you doing this?
If my standing up and continuing to declare my innocence is going to hurt my chances for an appeal, then so be it. But I should certainly hope not.
Me speaking out and standing up for my innocence is going to hurt my appeal, then so be it. It's like, no, dude. What's more important, winning your appeal or giving an interview saying you're innocent? But honestly, like, this is sometimes what happens with criminal defendants. And like when we talk to clients, sometimes civil cases, criminal cases, we try to tell them stuff, but they get certain things in their head and they're just like, it's about the principle. And it's like, man, doing things for the principle can be very expensive and very costly, more than just with money. And that's something here. It's like, if you actually think this has a chance of hurting your appeal, why are you doing it? You're saying all you care about is getting home to your family.
on. I should hope that my declaring my innocence should not be, a reason for any judge to be punitive. For any judge to decide that they're going to put me away for longer, or they're going to deny my appeal. So we'll certainly see whether there is any kind of repercussion for me continuing to say that I'm innocent. And if it is, it's wrong. But we'll see.
A repercussion for saying you're innocent. It's you lose out on certain mitigation and certain acceptance of responsibility, downward departure type things. So, that's really where you're being, if you want to say you're being punished or being hurt for it, you're always allowed to maintain your innocence. That's fine. But you have to realize then you're not going to get those mitigating factors, which sometimes that's the case. And if I was innocent, I would do the same thing personally.
How did the DNA get under the victim's fingernails? And that was your DNA.
That, again, I don't know, sir. Because then, like I said, I don't know that it was ever under his fingernails. I did not kill Mr. Gurman.
How did they plant your DNA? I don't know that my DNA was ever under the fingernails. It's like, okay, well, they gathered it and tested it. So again, that would have to be a lot of people, because you can't just say it's a positive test, right? You have to get the DNA. You have to convince somebody you got it from under the fingernail. So kind of multiple cops or crime scene techs involved there. Then you got to convince, if there's really no DNA there, you got to convince the person testing it that it's your DNA, or go get your DNA from something else, plant it in the area, get it so that when they test it, it comes back as being yours. But there's a lot of people involved there, a lot of scientific testing involved there as well.
I know that's what, they say that my DNA was in his nails, but I don't know how that may have occurred.
Why were the shoes cut up underneath your couch?
I don't know. I'm wondering the same thing. If supposedly I was the person who committed this crime, why not just throw those things away? It makes no sense to cut up shoes.
And the same would be, why cut up a hat? And why get rid of other items, according to prosecutors and according to your...
Why do all this dumb stuff? That makes no sense. And again, wait, I'm teasing still the juror interview. I'm not teasing it as much as I am. Remember these things about how even he says, oh, this is so dumb, for when we hear from the jurors.
Conviction. This jury believes you killed Mr. Gehrman, you came home, you cut up the shoes, you cut up the hat, but then you got rid of other items, including the orange shirt, the pants, and the murder weapon. How did those items still get in your home if they're trying to frame you? Where is the murder weapon?
And again, so that just what you're saying makes no sense, right? I mean, if I were the killer and I got rid of some of the items, why wouldn't I get rid of all of the items at once? It makes no sense. And then on top of that, the alleged hiding places for these items, one was under my couch, and then another was an open toolbox. Again, it just doesn't make any sense.
If you believe that the jury got it wrong and you are still innocent, what is your message to that jury then? They vested so much time and did their civil duty. What's your message to the jury?
Yeah, I appreciate that they felt they did their duty, but they got it wrong. But again, beyond that, there's not much else I can say.
Honestly, there's no good answer to that question, so I'm not going to hammer him for that answer. It's like, what do you say there? They got it wrong. I don't think they did it on purpose, but I think they were tricked by the people who conspired against me. Maybe you say something like that. And again, the conspiracy continues to the state attorney's office now. And maybe the judge, maybe the jury.
I'm focused on trying to prove my innocence and trying to get home.
Did you kill Jeff Gehrman?
I did not, sir, no.
Yeah, and again, your message to his family.
And I'm very sorry for their loss. We've all been through a lot with this situation. And I'm hoping that, that they too can, when they move on, and it's a horrible, horrible situation all around. We're all suffering for it.
Why did your team decide to go with the narrative versus you being asked questions on the stand? It appeared to me that the jury was never given an explanation for that. And that's what juries expect. They expect the defense team to ask questions. Why did you choose narrative?
I chose a narrative style just because, again, I had so much to say that it would have been so difficult for us to get through it all if we were doing it in a question and answer form. Just like in any, and again,
It had nothing to do with my attorneys maybe not believing or thinking it was true, which could be the case, but that's usually how we get to narrative. He's saying he just had way too much to say. They wouldn't have been able to get it all in with a question and answer. I don't think I've never seen a judge limit a direct examination for a criminal defendant when they're on trial for literally their life, but maybe that's what he was worried about.
I'm not testifying as an expert witness, but oftentimes when an expert witness testifies, they're given a question and they'll.
Oh, and he's an expert witness, so he was going to testify as an expert witness, basically is what he was thinking, because they're allowed to give narratives sometimes.
They'll elaborate quite a bit on that one particular question. I had so many particular questions that I wanted to answer that for us to do it in a question and answer form would have just been so tedious. I think we would have lost the jury well before we got halfway through my testimony. So that's why it was a narrative.
They would have lost the jury if it was question and answer, but because he did a narrative, they really kept the jury locked in. That's interesting.
Anything that you wish you had said that you think could have changed your trial?
I think if perhaps I thought we made it clear that I was home when that SUV drove into my neighborhood. If it was not, maybe I wish I would have hammered on that more to just say, hey, look, I cannot be in two places at once, so you got to consider that. I was at home. So I think that would have been pretty definitive as far as, evidence goes that I'm innocent. But beyond that, I think we did what we could.
Prosecutors say that you were not home, that your cell phone was home, and that's the reason why your wife was wondering where you were.
If you recall, again, their own expert testified that at 8:50 a.m. I was using my phone, texting, and at 9, so at home at 8:50, texting, and then this SUV comes into my neighborhood at 9:10. So even their evidence shows the same. Like I said, that's what I needed to hammer on more, I think, and perhaps that got lost in all the shuffle of all this evidence, I think.
Is there any other evidence that you had hoped that the jury would see that you think could have changed the outcome?
I think a bit more of the evidence regarding motivations behind Detective Jappy's actions would have perhaps demonstrated that Detective Jappy was not just doing his job.
Okay, that was it. The feed cut off because the time was limited from.
Which again, that's not unusual. But what we are going to watch here, because I think it was interesting. Some people sent me some clips of they talked to the interviewer about like what was the vibe there, what was he like, and I think it's kind of interesting to hear this perspective.
Matt, great job on the interview. People online are saying what a great job you did, and it's fascinating to me that he is really hanging on to this. I love your first question because it really put him in an awkward position to talk about Garriman's family, and he felt a little thrown by that, and was giving maybe the rehearsed answer for that he'd had in his head. Oh, I feel sorry for them, but he seemed a bit off guard, which was great. And then all of the follow-ups were, did anything stand out to you that maybe we didn't see in terms of the environment of the jail or him or anything, him walking up, anything stand up out to you that maybe we couldn't pick up on the video there from your vantage point interviewing Telus?
Yeah, it's a little bit interesting to do an interview with an inmate over at the Clark County Detention Center, which is across the street from the jail that he was, or this courthouse where he was convicted less than 48 hours ago. Like just that in itself is mind-boggling. But, being in that environment, you're in a very small cubicle. You're not face-to-face. You're not facing him on the other side of a glass. He isn't brought down and shackled in front of you. He's on a monitor. And it's very it's a different experience there, and they're timing you. So you have to get in your questions very quickly. And we started with what I wanted to hear about the most, which is the victim in this case, because not once during this 8-day of testimony, this 3-week trial, did he ever look over at the victim's family that were there each and every day in this courthouse, in that courtroom, looking at him. When he was on the stand, he never looked at them. He never addressed the victim. He never addressed the loss of life. You know, if you believe that you're innocent of a crime, you can still say that you are very sorry that someone died and that you want justice for that person. Never once have I ever heard him say that, and he still kind of tap dances around that answer in my interview with him just a few moments ago, Ted.
Yeah, he sure did. And the other part of the equation, I love that you brought up to him, he knows this very well as an attorney. His only chance of seeing the light of day is to say, I did it, I'm sorry, I've rehabilitated 20-some years from now. And he's doing this before he's even sentenced. And a judge can depart upward. He seems oblivious to it, and you wonder if he wants his family to still somehow believe that he didn't do it. But you were there during the sentencing, and to me, it felt like the family knew he did it. Like that they were asking for leniency and for an opportunity for parole down the line. But it sure came across that they acknowledged and they accepted the jury's verdict. I don't know about you, but what was your take in terms of that and the idea that he's still now saying he didn't do it?
I think that we were all looking at each other when we're seeing the family for the first time, the wife, the ex-wife, and then the mother take the stand. She flew in from Texas where he had grown up. And, they're pleading for leniency. And it was what they didn't say, because not one person except the mother took acceptance of this whole trial process and that he was convicted. They never said anything about the victim's family. And again, it was just self-serving. And he was breaking down in tears when he was hearing his mom talk about him being a family man. And that's why I was pressing him on that issue in this interview, because I didn't see his family there at court. Usually when someone is wrongfully accused in their eyes, the family sticks behind the person. But in this case, we didn't see that. We didn't see them mention that when they were giving their mitigation answers to this jury before the sentencing recommendation. We didn't see any of that. And that in itself was also very telling, I think, for a lot of people, Ted.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. He didn't.
Yeah, it's like, and they would know if he was there with them that day at the house, right? At that time.
Want his family there, because if they would have attended trial every day, they would have said, oh boy, he did it. There's overwhelming evidence. The DNA under the nails, I mean, he just doesn't have an answer for it. And it's almost like, yeah, I'm mad too. You think you guys are upset by the deal. Look, I'm upset by this too. But no, I mean, it's what he's alleging. This conspiracy is so detailed and hits so many different. It's not just Compass Realty. They're not able to plant DNA. And it's funny that's the one thing on the stand. And then again, when you asked him,
I guess theoretically they could, but he's making the point that there's so many people in different departments that would have to be involved just to get Robert Tellis.
He just doesn't have an answer.
He just talks in a circle. And I was sitting there in front of him, in front of that monitor, asking him questions. And I felt like I was listening to his narrative that when he was on the stand. It's everybody but him that is at fault of this. People are planting evidence against him. It's the realty group. It's the realtors. It is the police department. It is the district attorney. He has this wide conspiracy theory, and there is no facts to back it up. He just talks in a circle that he is innocent, that he is being framed, and that the jury got it wrong, which I really find very insulting for someone. He had a law degree at one point in time. He's supposed to respect the system, and clearly he doesn't.
Yeah, I think you can say the jury got it wrong in a respectful way, and you can still respect the system and say a jury got it wrong. I get what he's saying, but I don't think he was overly disrespectful to the jury. We've definitely seen that from lawyers and people that have lost at trial in the past. I won't mention any names. I think you still can disagree with the jury and respect the system.
Yeah, and as Michael Jaffer was pointing out, he had it all. He had a great job, and he was an elected official. He was able to practice law in Las Vegas. Yeah, he lost his election, but that didn't mean he lost his ability to make a good living and have a family. You were
Brianna, they agree with you.
there for a very long period of time, and I know you have roots there, so you understand Vegas as being this small town rather than this massive area that we all think it is when we head to the casino for a long weekend and forget half of it. But what effect did all of this have? I know you talked about it a little bit before on the community, because this was a guy that was in the papers before he was a defendant. He was an elected official and part of this community.
Yeah, I love the juxtaposition that you're bringing up here, because you have this defendant, now convicted killer. And I loved how the prosecutors brought it up in their rebuttal closing. They said no one knew what a county administrator was before this case even came about. No one was doing an investigation until the allegations of a hostile work environment came forward. And then you have this journalist, this investigative journalist working for the major newspaper in this small town, who is also really well known for his work with uncovering investigations with the mob and with casinos and a lot of investigative work. So you have this beloved person in the community that was also, doing local sports. He would be very active in other ways. And it is a small town. Everybody knows everybody else. So this was a really big deal when Jeff Garriman was murdered 2 years ago. And we're approaching the anniversary of that because remember, that happened September 2nd, 2022. That was the heart of Labor Day weekend. And then you have this murder and no one could figure out why he was attacked and who did it. And it was a call to arms, call to action. And then you had everyone in these communities really worried for their own safety that this killer is out on the loose. So there was a lot to this story as it was unfolding. And when you think about, Las Vegas seems like a big city when you visit. If you were to remove the casinos, there is no city skyline. It's one county, Clark County, that is all of Las Vegas and the surrounding areas. It's a small town.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, that's a massive skyline. But you move that out of the way, and there it is.
You just remove the skyline in Tampa. There's no skyline.
So great job, Matt Johnson, with the interview.
That's who it is, Olga. Matt Johnson. That's who we were just hearing from. That's who interviewed Tellis. A couple other things I want to point out. Hey, Peter, are you going to do a YSL update with Big G? So we don't have anything on the books right now, but if you guys want it and there's some specific thing happening or some big highlight you want to make sure we hit, send it to me. Tag me on Twitter, Instagram, at Tragos Law or at Lawyer You Know, depending on which site. On Instagram, it's Tragos Law. Twitter, it's Lawyer You Know. It's so annoying. Eventually, one day, maybe we'll have all of it sorted. But also, Melissa, I've heard a couple people asking about the Judge Jumper Diobra Redden trial. We did the video breaking down when this actually happened in real time, and it has gone to trial rather quickly. So if you guys want to have me break down something on this, let me know. You guys choose it. We don't have anything scheduled for tomorrow right now. We're still kind of figuring out what we're going to do. So if you guys come and bring content, the more people that ask, the more likely it is that we pull that content. But without further ado, let's get to what I've been most interested in, and that's hearing from these jurors. Two different jurors, two different interviews. Here we go. They're both very short, about 3 minutes long, but there's a lot to unpack.
At length about that jury decision and how he says the jury in his murder trial got it wrong.
And tonight, 8 News Now investigator Kyle Payne has the first public interview with one of those jurors who says she and those 11 other jurors got it right. Kyle, what else did that juror say?
Right, Ozzy, one of the big things we're learning from this juror, at some point, the jury wrote a note telling the judge they were deadlocked. One juror wanted to acquit Robert Tellis, but as we know, they all ended up voting guilty. Do you think Robert Tellis got a fair trial?
He did, without a doubt. And the fact that he was allowed to do a narrative as a testimony makes it even more so that he received a fair trial.
Robert Tellis murder trial, juror number 6, asking the 8 News Now investigators not to use her name or show her face, preferring instead to let her 2.5 weeks of jury service do the talking.
I didn't kill Mr. Gurman.
Just like Tellis did for 3 days on the stand, explaining his theory that he was framed and making this assertion.
When the medical examiner testified, that's the first time I'd learned how Mr. Gurman was murdered.
Which juror number 6 simply couldn't believe.
Blatant lie.
But Tellis was convincing enough, perhaps, on the stand, and his defense attorney, Robert Draskevich, persuasive enough.
Metro makes mistakes.
That when the jury of 5 men and 7 women took its very first vote behind closed doors, 7 had Tellis guilty and 1 was absolutely certain of it. 4 were on.
Like I said, 1 very guilty. By the way, she thought it was wild that he was allowed to give a narrative. She didn't believe what he had to say. And I don't know if she was the very guilty or just one of the guilty, but pretty clear. I feel like I know where she started.
Decided, and 1 thought Tellis was not guilty.
I was keeping an open mind. I had not made a decision at that point based upon the testimony and evidence that had been presented. If I were to vote at that time, it would have been for guilty.
Then, as they reviewed the evidence and looked at this photo of someone in the murderer's dark red SUV,
Look at the profile.
and saw a man that didn't look like Tellis because this driver had hair, they realized that hair was a shadow, and the vote changed. Now 8 jurors thought Tellis was guilty, and 4 not guilty.
He thought.
So some of the undecideds came to the guilty side, some went to the not guilty side because of exactly what we were kind of thinking about while we were waiting and wondering what took the jury so long. Now we have one of those answers. It was that picture. It was what the defense pointed out. That's why the jury asked to look at it again and to zoom in. So that was exactly the things that were so important to the case and to the jury. And it's wild to see what this roller coaster was like, right? Vast majority guilty. Some undecided, only one not guilty. Then more guilties, but also more not guilties. So it's difficult to kind of work through, and then they end up getting the guilty altogether. So kind of wild, right? Not really what I expected to hear. I thought maybe one holdout, they come along, boom, guilty, bada bang, we're done. But that's not how it was, and that's why it took days.
Thought that he was smarter than everyone else. And so if he did all these things, no one would be able to point the finger of blame at him.
Another deep dive into the evidence, and this jury got closer to guilt, voting 10-2 to 4 not guilty.
I missed what she said, so I'm just backing it up.
He thought that he was smarter than everyone else. And so if he did all these things, no one would be able to point the finger of blame at him.
Another deep dive into the evidence.
He thought he was going to be smart enough to do all these things, and people wouldn't be able to point the finger of blame. So he thought he was going to outsmart everybody, thought he was the smartest guy in the room, thought he could trick people. It's not a good feeling if you're a juror, if you think that's what the defendant is doing.
Evidence, and this jury got closer to guilt, voting 10-2 to send Tellus to prison, which eventually all 12 agreed to do. Using damning.
And it got 10-2 as they continue to go through evidence, then all 12 guilty votes. Very interesting. And if I'm Tellus, right, or if I'm his lawyers, this is giving me more confidence. If at some point 4 people out of 12, a third of the jury was voting not guilty, you start building on that confidence. And I think if he were to do all this again, I feel like, he feels like there's got to be motive, and I think that's where he kind of loses the boat. But it's like, different car in my neighborhood, phone proves I was home, picture proves this wasn't me, it's somebody else in the front seat of this car that looks like mine. And you just create that reasonable doubt versus prove your innocence with this big narrative that people might not like you or believe you, or they might just kind of hate you or think you're guilty if you take the stand. But I think there was opportunity for reasonable doubt with this jury, because at one point, 4 of them voted not guilty, and it seems mostly because of who was that in that car. Could it have been somebody else? Could it have been a different car? Could it have not been him because maybe he was at his house and this guy with the hair or the, a hoodie over his head or whatever it is, or was it a shadow? Make the state prove it's a shadow. That could be difficult. Is that the better angle? So the defense team is learning from this. And I would say building more confidence, because I kind of thought it was a slam dunk guilty personally. Personally, I thought it was slam dunk guilty. I was surprised how long it took. Hearing this, the defense had more to work with than even I thought.
Scientific evidence to make their verdict.
The evidence was not wrong. Our decision was based upon the evidence presented. He didn't question the evidence. He questioned the motive behind the evidence. Was that he was being set up. But when your DNA is under the victim's fingernails,
boom. Evidence was not wrong. DNA under the fingernails. Another huge piece of evidence. We all said, how do you get around that? He didn't really hit it. He didn't have an explanation for it, except that it was planted again, which seems far-fetched. And that was a big one for this juror.
That's a clear signal as well.
Juror number 6 tells me they were split on whether to sentence Tellus to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But then Tellus's mother testified, saying she accepted the jury's verdict, but asked that he have a chance to see his children again. That convinced the jury to give Tellus the opportunity to one day see the light of day, Ozzy.
So they were going to go life without parole, but the mom literally single-handedly changed their testimony. How about that? That was an interesting little tidbit right at the end. That was cool. All right, let's get to the second juror interview here. This is the foreman of the jury.
Candid conversation with the jury foreperson in the Robert Tellus murder trial. You're watching 8 News Now at 6. I'm Brian Loftus.
And I'm Denise Valdez. Tellus, of course, convicted on Wednesday in the 2022 stabbing of investigative reporter Jeff Gehrman. 8 News Now investigator Kyle Payne spoke with that juror, who tells us he gave Tellus every chance he could, but in the end says there was simply too much evidence against him.
The jury foreperson and I spoke for over a half hour. He was unsure of whether to convict Tellus until he heard Tellus on the stand, telling the jury about the vast conspiracy against him and the hitman who Tellus says killed Jeff Gehrman.
That's why when I went back there, I was a strong guilty at the beginning.
So maybe he was the one very guilty or strong guilty, whatever she said before. I don't know.
Just couldn't find the piece of evidence that he wanted us to find.
Finding Robert Tellis guilty took Foreman Gregory Whitney and the 11 other jurors the better part of 3 days of deliberating to get to this moment.
Guilty of first-degree murder with use of a deadly weapon.
But Tellis told 8 News Now investigator Vanessa Murphy that the jury got it wrong.
I get where he's coming from. He really thought he could prove his innocence.
By the way, that was a different interview with a different interviewer. So he gave multiple interviews. I'm assuming he said similar things because he said similar things in his narrative. But just think about all these interviews he's giving now. And if they affect my appeal, so be it, he said. It's like, wow.
Really wanted to tell his story. He thought he told it well enough, but
in 3 days on the witness stand,
he thought he wanted to tell a story and he thought he told it well enough, which should tell you this guy doesn't agree.
And pleading his case to the jury.
I'm not the kind of person who could brutally murder another man.
Whitney says Tellis said so many things, he began to undermine his own story, which the longer it went on, began to fall apart. And the more they heard, the less they believed. Even so, they scoured over more than 400 pieces of evidence and testimony from 30 witnesses or so, trying to make sure they got it right.
And we really wanted to just let everyone know that we really did look over everything from point A to point B, and we wanted to get him his best shot. I
respect it, right? And maybe that's why it took a long time. It took days. They went over everything from they got from point A to point B. They didn't skim over anything. They didn't rush. And that's how you can have confidence in their verdict. And that's how you can have confidence in the outcome. And Tellis going to disagree with it all he wants. But if they would have come back in 5 minutes, some people would have said, wow, that's so great. He was so obviously guilty. But I think they would have had an argument to say, well, maybe they didn't care. Something happened. Maybe it was a big setup. That's why they came back in 5 minutes. Like, no, this jury did their job. They worked through it. They were excruciatingly detailed about it, apparently, because it literally took days and they went over everything. And I also think that when a juror comes out and speaks publicly, they're not likely to lie because they know there are 11 other people that could be like, this guy is lying. We didn't go over all the evidence. We didn't take that much time. We were just playing cards back there, enjoying our time as celebrity jurors, right? Because he knows somebody could come out and say that if he's going to lie. So they're unlikely to lie in situations like this, which gives them more credibility. And this is how all sorts of credibility is determined in trials and in cases. Is that's why certain hearsay, there's exceptions and certain ones there's not. We want reliable, credible evidence and statements to come in. And I think there's a lot of credibility in these public interviews with jurors because they know they can be called out, because it's not like they're the only person with this experience. 11 other people were in the room. And again, take that back and apply it to the Karen Reed situation, same thing. And they went a step further to say, we think everybody would agree with us. And that's unusual.
Personally knew nothing about the guy, so I didn't have any bias. I started reading. I personally knew nothing about the guy, so I didn't have any bias. I started reading all the comments afterwards, and I was like, if people were wondering, what took us so long?
What took so long, in part, is that certain jurors needed convincing that enough of the evidence pointed to Tellis, and that the jury could disprove Tellis's claims that the police and his political enemies, among others, conspired to kill Gehrman to get rid of Tellis, even saying he wouldn't be foolish enough to drive his own car to the scene of the crime.
So now we get into some of the arguments that were made by the lawyers and Tellis. And if you remember the part of the interview, it's like, well, I would never do that. Would I be so dumb to drive my own car and to put the hat here and the clothes, hide them under my couch? And why would I get rid of some things and other? That's so dumb. Well, did that work with at least one juror?
Police, who gathered 5 miles of video evidence of Tellis's dark red SUV around the time of the murder, said is exactly what happened.
Tellis's vehicle was the one used in the commission of Jeffrey Gehrman's murder.
And it's moments and mistakes like that, Whitney says, when others who were at one point undecided, decided, including one juror in particular.
When she did switch over, she's just like, she's like, the main reason I switched over, or I didn't want to switch to guilty, is she just couldn't believe somebody could be that like dumb and making so many little mistakes. And it's just like, well, how?
You'd have to be a real idiot to plan a crime and do it like this. When Tellis made that argument, it almost worked with one juror. She was like, yeah, that would be really dumb. He couldn't have done that, right? And she was one of the holdouts based on that argument. Again, we're learning here what arguments worked, what didn't. We know the hair shadow person in the car kind of worked. And this one kind of worked, which honestly makes sense because it is really dumb. But then at the end of the day, it's like, it's also the only explanation. And sometimes the simplest explanation is often true.
Switch over. She's just like, she's like, the main reason I switched over, or I didn't want to switch to guilty, is she just couldn't believe somebody could be that like dumb and making so many little mistakes. And it's just like, well, Like, how?
How and why are questions this jury didn't have to answer and will likely never be answered.
It sticks with you. Like, it really does. There's like, when I was looking through a lot of those evidence photos, like I saw stuff that, you know, it'll stay with me because it's not a normal case. It was really one of those cases where you don't believe that could be a real story.
This is the second juror I've interviewed since the verdict on Wednesday. They both said Tellis's own testimony sank him, and neither of them were able to get over the police finding Tellis's DNA under Gehrman's fingernails. For them, it seems that was as good as a smoking gun. In the studio, I'm Kyle Payne.
All right, so his own testimony sank him, and then the DNA under the fingernails. No surprise. I think that would have been pretty consistent to what the chat said throughout the trial as well. Serenity. Thank you, Peter, for an informative, intelligent room, creating fun, the best chat, and having great mods this last 18 months of membership. Thank you, Serenity, and everybody else in the chat that does this and makes it great. Kurt, in your opinion, how often do you think a jury comes back with a guilty verdict to avoid a thing like a riot if voted not guilty? Not necessarily the case. I would say rarely. It probably does happen, unfortunately, and it definitely can happen, but I do think it's rare. I think it's the exception, not the rule, and I definitely don't think it happened in this case. Belinda, hi, Peter, off topic, but will you look at the Mia Campos case out of Georgia, and which other cases do you have in mind? So right now, I think on the forefront of my mind is Donna Adelson's trial is about to happen and Sarah Boone. Those seem to be the two that are we're on the doorstep of, but I think we have another week basically before either of those start. I think a week till Adelson, then Adelson might go right into the beginning of Boone, depending on how long everything takes. So let me know. I'm totally open. If other people want this case or any of the other cases mentioned, please let me know in the chat. Nina said, I sent you an email. YSL judge rebuked the prosecutor about time in front of the jury. That's interesting. They really played dirty. Big George knows. I'll have to take a look at that. And Net Woman, could you cover Mississippi versus Carly Gregg? I've never heard of it. So again, anybody in the chat has heard of it, let me know if you want to hear this too, and send me clips and articles and videos and whatever you have on it. Send me to get the ball rolling. It's a 14-year-old, I'm assuming, defendant trying to use the insanity defense, not filing motions and trying to do trial by ambush. And the defendant showed friend's mom ahead of time to friend waiting for stepdad to come. It's an interesting case and not from Florida. Yeah, thank you. Net Woman's just looking out for my sanity and being labeled a Florida man. You got to worry about being labeled a Florida man. But I totally get that this one might be a little difficult, but a lot of interesting legal aspects. It sounds like she's a minor using insanity defense, trial by ambush. Does she have lawyers? Is she pro se? I have a lot of questions, probably more questions than answers at this point because I don't know anything about it. I think next week we're going to start talking more about, I honestly personally hate teases, but I talked with John and Kelsey about putting together some things to preview what's coming the second week of September. I'm looking forward to it. And these new case requests and ideas will be put on a list for that new thing coming. So thank you guys for sending this. Thank you, Net Woman, so much, and everybody that's sending different case options. So that's it. That's all we got. This will probably tie a bow on the Tellis coverage. But please, guys, let me know what's coming up, what you want to hear, what you want to talk about, because that's what really drives it. I love the conversation and interaction with the chat and answering questions. So that's why you guys drive the content. But that's it for this video. Hit the like button, subscribe, do all the YouTube-y things. A lot more to come. But until next time, I'm out of here. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. And don't forget to check out the Lawyer You Know podcast with new seasons dropping every quarter. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, The Lawyer You Know.